Welcome to Module 6 of Cells, Tissues and Regulation. In Topic 6.3, we will learn about control over blood pressure and the homeostasis of red blood cell production. During the course of this video, you can open your workbooks to Module 6 and try and answer as many questions as you can from Topic 6.3. Please carefully read the learning objectives for this topic by pausing the video on the next two slides. Blood pressure can be defined as the force per unit area exerted by the blood on the vessel wall and is expressed in millimeters of mercury. Blood pressure is recorded as two numbers, systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. Systolic pressure is the peak pressure that is generated when the heart contracts. Indeed, if the aorta were to be opened during this period, blood would spurt upwards for about 5 or 6 feet. The diastolic pressure is the pressure in the arteries when the heart is relaxed between beats. The normal blood pressure for a healthy human adult is about 120/80 millimeters of mercury. The basics of blood pressure physiology are simple. An increase in blood pressure can be due to the following factors. As blood is pumped by the heart, an increase in the heart rate, which is the number of beats per minute, and the force of contraction can both raise the blood pressure. Blood pressure can also increase by an increase in peripheral resistance. Resistance is the opposition of flow and is a measure of the amount of friction blood encounters as it passes through the vessels. Because most of the resistance is encountered by the peripheral circulation, or the systemic circulation, away from the heart, we use the term peripheral resistance. Vasoconstriction, due to the effect of hormones such as vasopressin and norepinephrine, can increase the blood pressure by increasing peripheral resistance. As blood circulates in a closed system, an increase in blood volume due to the action of hormones such as aldosterone can also increase the blood pressure. Cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped out by the heart in 1 minute. It is the product of heart rate and stroke volume. Stroke volume is the volume of blood pumped out by the heart in a single beat. At rest, the heart beats approximately 70 times per minute and pumps approximately 70 mils per beat. Therefore, the average adult cardiac output is roughly 4 litres per minute. However, during exercise, it may increase tenfold, up to 40 litres per minute. Blood pressure homeostasis is crucial because the tolerances are very low, particularly with respect to acute falls in blood pressure. This is because a sudden drop in the blood pressure can deprive the brain of adequate blood supply, and therefore oxygen, leading to lightheadedness or loss of consciousness. Sudden drops in blood pressure is most common in early mornings when people stand upright from their lying position. Maintaining blood pressure is critical for the cardiovascular system's homeostasis. Its regulation involves 3 key variables: an adequate cardiac output that is mediated via the heart, sufficient peripheral resistance that is mediated via smooth muscle in small arteries, inducing vasoconstriction or vasodilation depending on the requirements of the tissue, and an adequate blood volume, which is largely regulated by the kidneys. Blood pressure is proportionate to cardiac output and peripheral resistance, meaning that anything that increases the cardiac output or peripheral resistance will directly increase blood pressure. Blood volume is a component of the cardiac output. Therefore, an increase in blood volume will also increase blood pressure. As your textbook indicates, blood pressure homeostasis can be complicated, so we're going to focus mostly on the major components. Blood pressure control, like thermoregulation, requires extensive central nervous system integration. Several clusters of neurons in the brain act together to regulate blood pressure by altering cardiac output and blood vessel diameter. Baroreceptors are pressure-sensitive receptors that respond to changes in arterial pressure and stretch. When the arterial blood pressure rises, it activates the baroreceptors in the vessel walls, which sends impulses to the brain. The brain responds by decreasing the sympathetic impulses to the heart and blood vessels. As we have learnt in the previous module, reduced sympathetic impulses leads to a reduced release of noradrenaline from the sympathetic neurons. This leads to vasodilation by smooth muscle relaxation and decreases the heart rate and cardiac output. On the other hand, if the blood pressure falls below the normal range, impulses from the baroreceptors are inhibited. This causes the brain to increase its sympathetic contraction and outflow, thereby increasing the rate of noradrenaline release, which stimulates smooth muscle contraction and an increased heart rate. The result is an increase in total cardiac output and peripheral resistance, which, as we mentioned before, means an increase in blood pressure. The kidneys regulate blood pressure indirectly via the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. When the arterial blood pressure declines, the juxtaglomerular apparatus in the renal tissue releases the enzyme called renin. Renin enzymatically splits or cleaves angiotensinogen, a plasma protein produced by the liver, to angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is then converted by angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, into angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor, increasing the blood pressure by massively increasing peripheral resistance. Angiotensin 2 also stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete aldosterone, a hormone that enhances renal absorption of sodium and water, thereby increasing blood volume. The combination of increased peripheral resistance and increased blood volume work together to increase total blood pressure. Red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes, are completely dedicated to their job of transporting respiratory gases. Hemoglobin is an iron-containing protein that gives red cells its red colour. It binds easily and reversibly with oxygen, thereby allowing it to transport oxygen throughout the body. The oxygen loading occurs in the lungs. As oxygen-deficient blood passes through the lungs, oxygen diffuses from the alveoli into the blood and then into the erythrocytes where it binds to hemoglobin. In the tissues, this process is reversed as oxygen detaches from iron and hemoglobin resumes its former shape, thereby allowing carbon dioxide to bind with the hemoglobin, which is then transported from the tissues back to the lungs for the carbon dioxide to be exhaled. Each red cell can hold approximately 300 million hemoglobin molecules. Mature erythrocytes are bound by a plasma membrane and are anucleated, meaning they do not have a nucleus, and as a result, they also lack organelles. The number of circulating erythrocytes in a given individual is remarkably constant and reflects a balance between red cell production and destruction. To ensure the number of erythrocytes in the blood remains within the homeostatic range, cells are produced at an incredibly rapid rate of more than 200 million cells per second in healthy people. And because our brain and other organs are entirely reliant on a constant supply of oxygen, maintaining an adequate red blood cell concentration is crucial. In cases where the number of red cells are reduced due to hemorrhage or excessive red cell destruction, the tissues may become hypoxic, which means they do not have sufficient oxygen, and in extreme conditions they can become anoxic, where the tissues have no oxygen at all. Homeostasis of red blood cell production is another major function that is regulated by the kidneys. Maintaining a constant number of erythrocytes within the homeostatic range is critical, because having too few red blood cells can lead to hypoxia or oxygen deprivation, whilst having too many can make the blood undesirably viscous. When certain kidney cells become hypoxic or oxygen deficient due to factors such as decreased red cell count, decreased amount of hemoglobin, or the decreased availability of oxygen, the kidneys accelerate the synthesis and release of erythropoietin into the blood. Small amounts of erythropoietin is also produced by the liver. Erythropoietin then stimulates the synthesis of red blood cells from the bone marrow. Erythropoiesis is the production of red blood cells. When the red blood cells reach the normal range, the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood is increased, which stops the release of erythropoietin. This is another classic example of a negative feedback loop, where control is via one hormone and no central nervous system integration is required. Normal homeostatic control of the red cell concentration can be changed by artificially increasing erythropoietin levels. This results in a higher than normal red blood cell level, increasing stamina and performance due to increased oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. That is the primary advantage of having an increased red blood cell concentration. At high altitudes, the amount of oxygen available is low. Therefore, individuals living at higher altitudes have a greater red blood cell concentration due to increased erythropoietin production. This increases the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood and prevents hypoxia in tissues in the oxygen deficient environment. Athletes are often subjected to low oxygen exposure to stimulate erythropoietin production, thereby increasing the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. This increases the athlete's stamina and performance. However, abuse of artificially produced recombinant erythropoietin by some athletes can have severe consequences. By injecting erythropoietin, athletes increase their normal red cell concentration, making the blood more viscous. With dehydration that can occur during a long race, the blood plasma level falls even further and the blood becomes thick and sticky. This can cause blood clots, leading to stroke or even a heart attack. This topic will be discussed further in the tutorial sessions. In summary, from this video, we have learnt about the determinants of blood pressure, the maintenance of blood pressure, the actions of renin and angiotensin, the role of baroreceptors and central nervous system in regulation of blood pressure, the homeostasis of red blood cell production, and erythropoietin.